Okay.
Go. 100.1 FM, AM 1020 KDKA. This is Cars, Stars, and Everything in Between. He is the star, Richard Bazzi from Schultz Ford at schultzford.com. I'm Bubba from 100.7 Star. And on with us today is an absolute star. The name may not immediately ring a bell, but through the course of this conversation, you will very clearly realize who John Russo is. John, welcome to Cars, Stars, and Everything in Between.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
John and Bubba, I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to pretend that you're a sample size of the entire city of Pittsburgh. So you guys represent the city of Pittsburgh, and John, obviously you're a little biased, but Bubba and everybody, if I were to say to anybody in the city of Pittsburgh, tell me one film that you associate Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania with, everybody would say Night of the Living Dead.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Right? Absolutely.
I grew up with it. And frankly, I never saw it. But it is absolutely, it is more than a film. As our social media, one of our social media managers, Sam, said, it created an entire genre. Do you agree with that, John?
Well, of course. And guess what? I'm the one that created it. George Romero and I wrote the script. And it used to be that the producer got all the credit for movies. You know, nowadays, and for a long time, it's been the director, which I don't resent, but I like to tell people the truth about what really happened. And the fact is that George Romero and I worked on the script, but I'm the one that came up with the idea of dead people after human flesh, and I wrote most of the script, as it turned out. So the major ideas in it were mine, and that includes plotting out the entire escape attempt. Without the idea of dead people after human flesh, you don't have Night of the Living Dead or anything that came after it.
So you wrote it. Did you direct it also?
No, George Romero directed it.
George Romero directed it.
Did a great job.
And you guys met at CMU, I think?
I'm sorry?
You met at CMU, is that right? Carnegie Mellon?
Well, George went to CMU.
Right.
He didn't quite graduate back then. Much later, he got an honorary degree. I think the only credits he needed were gym credits. He didn't show up for his gym classes, pretty sure. Yeah, but we were, we remained friends until he died, and I spoke at his funeral. And about 20 people spoke at his funeral. I got a standing ovation. And when George got his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, I was there along with Russ Stringer and Rob Lucas, and of course George's widow Suzanne. And they actually had a full page ad in Variety at that time, and they used quotes from my speech in the ad. So,
oh, wow.
One of the reasons I say this, a lot of fans thought that we were enemies for some reason. We weren't enemies. We were often rivals because I had movie projects and he had movie projects, but we always got along great. In fact, we would, when Russ Stringer and we did most of the work for Night of the Living Dead Live.
Yeah.
The only authorized stage play, which was produced in Toronto. When I say we did most of the work, I mean that we were the liaison between our group, George Romero, Russ, and I, and the Canadian producers. So for a period of about 2 years, Russ and I took a lot of trips to Canada and stuck with that project.
So John, let me ask you this. That's a pretty far out there premise. Eating human flesh. Zombie eating human flesh.
Right.
That's pretty far out there, John. Some might suggest that you're a little crazy.
Might suggest what?
That you're a little crazy.
a little crazy. Most of my, I've written about 50 novels, and every time I get a new editor, or had gotten a new editor, they would, after being with me for a while in meetings and so on, they'd look at me and say, "But you're such a nice guy."
Yes, don't turn me back because I'll eat your flesh.
They would say I was a gentleman of the old school. I said, "Well, I write about this stuff. I don't do it." Actually, when I was about 13 years old, I discovered a copy of the Police Gazette that my dad had hidden in the basement. And I read the story of Ed Gein for the first time, and I was appalled and scared and everything other thing that everybody is appalled and scared by Ed Gein, who did kill his mother and walk around wearing her breasts.
Oh.
Yeah, he embalmed her and made a vest out of her breast, and I thought, oh God. And ever since then, I've been interested in what makes these idiots tick. How do they get that way?
So actually, that was going to be my question.
Just like Lawrence Block wrote Psycho based on the Ed Gein story.
Yes.
Toby Hooper did Texas Chainsaw Massacre based on the Ed Gein story, and I guess it had something to do with Silence of the Lambs, which was shot here in Pittsburgh. And George Romero did a cameo in that movie. So, a lot of writers and movie makers are interested in what makes these bastards tick.
Wow.
And unfortunately, did you know that 75% of the world's serial killers live right here in America? We're number one.
I did not know that.
Yeah, well,
but it's all, isn't it crazy that, and when you turn, I'm not sure why I don't see you or why I don't see Bubba, but we need to correct that next time. But because my face is the only one I see, and that's not the best image. So I do want to correct that going forward, Bub. But when I look at what you did and you've paved the way, and I look at today's films and the way they're distributed, primarily through streaming, primarily Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime. And that's the way they're distributed. But it seems that we have an incredible thirst for the films like the depravity, the serial killers. We really, as a public, consume that content endlessly. And that's kind of a crazy statement about us.
Your image is kind of jerking and freezing here, so it's probably doing that on the air, but I don't know. Anyway, while you were talking about that, and I wrote an article that ended up getting published in Newsweek, and it was in 1990, and we were working out of the headquarters for the 1990 remake of Night of the Living Dead was in my office and studio on Market Square above the original Oyster House. And right around then, I wrote an article called Real versus Real Violence, REEL versus REAL. And the premise was that the gangster films of the 30s and 40s did not cause the gangsterism and the murders of the mafia and whatever, but they were echoing what was actually taking place in society. And I argued that America is a violent country that has 75% of the serial killers living here, and so the filmmakers who make slasher films are just showing what these bastards do.
Wow.
And so horror films, to a large extent, are a reflection of what's really going on in our society.
Which,
James
which, by the way, John, is a very, very, very scary thought. By the way, if you're just tuning in, this is John Russo. This is Cars, Stars, and Everything in Between. And we will be back with more John Russo coming up next.
Am I still on? I guess so.
Stand by.
Well, I was going to say that.
Stand by for 1 second, please.
I didn't hear that.
Of these people.
Should I keep going?
Stand by. And 1 second, please. And we'll start all over again. Here we go.
Ready?
100.1 FM, AM 1020, KDK AM. This is Cars, Stars, and Everything in Between. He's the star, Richard Bazzi from Schultz Ford. I'm Bubba from 100.7 Star, and our guest this week is John Russo. I got to tell you, Night of the Living Dead, Richard. Can I ask one question to start, Richard? How important was the music in the movie Night of the Living Dead? Because you know, music is such an integral part of horror films. Between you and George Romero, how much did the music and the music you chose play a part in the making of that movie?
How much? I'm sorry, I have a little high on hearing loss. But you say how much did what play a part?
How much did the music, the soundtrack that you guys used in the Night of the Living Dead play a role in that movie?
It was pivotal, and we didn't think it would be because it's library music for the most part, and we really wanted to have original music in our movie, but we couldn't afford it. And Carl Hardman and Marilyn Eastman had a studio called Hardman Associates, and they were sales agents for the Capitol High Q Library and another library at that time. I can't think which one it was, but they said, well, we can license this music to you. Well, George did an excellent job selecting the music, and we called them needle downs at that time. And you could go to WRS Motion Picture Lab, and you know, if you were scoring a commercial or industrial film or whatever, and when you heard something that you thought was right for your movie, you'd tell them, and that would be a needle down, because they would literally put the needle down on the disc and dub it off, and then they'd give you the dubs for the music you selected, and you put them into your movie. Well, George selected all the needle downs, and most of a lot of that music was used in other films, but it didn't get really noticed until we used it in Night of the Living Dead. But George was an excellent editor. Some people say he was a better editor than he was anything else, a director or whatever. And he would make gold out of lead a lot of times in our commercial work. So he just did a marvelous job using that music, and it had a powerful effect.
So, John, how do you go from what I mean, you said you had an inspiration at age 13 or 14, and that drove Night of the Living Dead, right? And
right.
So what do you do with that? You have this idea. It's new territory for you and for everybody. You have this idea. You meet a group of friends that you co-write, co-produce, and then what do you do with that? How did you take it from a great idea to a cult? Did you have any idea that this was ahead of you?
Well, it's like any piece of writing, and you stare at the blank page and hope that the ideas start through your head. George ended up. I said to George, whatever we do ought to start in a cemetery, because cemeteries are spooky. And even in Abbott and Costello Meet Dracula, they're in the graveyard, and they have Dracula's coffin in front of them, and the candlesticks are moving all over the coffin, and Lou is so scared that he can't hardly talk. But even while it's funny, it's scary. Yeah. So George wrote the first 20 minutes or so. One day he came, and I was working on a different concept that also started in a cemetery, and so George wrote about this girl being chased after her brother's head's bashed against a tombstone. And I read it and I said, well, you know, George, this really has all the right twists and turns, and I like it a lot. But who are these people chasing this girl? And he said, I don't know. I said, well, it seems to me they could be dead people. And he said, that's good. I said, but what do they do? You know, they don't claw, they don't bite. What do they do? And he said, I don't know. And I said, well, why don't we use my flesh eating idea? Because the idea I was working on was that we couldn't afford saucer landings or anything like that. So I was working on a concept where aliens are already here. And this boy gets punished. He and his friends steal a case of beer and they're burying it in a cemetery on Halloween night. One of them is wearing a ghoul mask, and they get caught. And the one kid gets punished, and he runs away from home, and he's going through the woods and crack his footsteps right through a pane of glass. It's embedded in the ground, and under that pane of glass is a rotting corpse. And my thought was that they, you know, in the Middle Ages, if they shot a goose, they hung it up to rot for a few days before they cooked it. And I thought, these aliens are already here on Earth. Nobody knows it yet. The boy discovers one of the corpses. There are more than one corpse there. And it's like, you know, tomatoes under a hothouse and hothouse glass. So anyway, I stopped writing that, and I still went to work on what George had written because he got tied up with a job for Orlando Advertising, and they wanted only him to be the director on this thing. And I thought, wow, if we don't finish this script, it's already April 1967, and we might never make a feature movie. And that was our goal in life. And so the way we worked in those days and forever was that somebody got sidetracked and whoever was there took over and took the ball and ran with it. So George said, well, go ahead, you know. And so in about 3 weeks, I wrote that script. We had some discussions with the other people, with Hardman and Eastman mostly, and along the way. And, you know, I said, well, they have to try to escape. But if the escape succeeds, the movie will only be 45 minutes long. So the escape attempt has to fail. And nobody would come up with any ideas except me for some reason, not even George. It was like he had exhausted whatever ideas he had at that point. And so I said, well, look, we have the young couple in the movie, and we have the hero, and we have the hard-headed asshole in the basement, Trump. Hardman. That's my little.
So you had a protagonist, you had an antagonist.
I make that supposed Freudian slip.
It's not a slip.
I said, so the escape has to fail, and you know if the young couple get blown up in the truck, all right, what's Hardman going to do? He's the coward. He's going to probably run for the cellar where he always wanted to be in the first place. And if he shuts that door and locks it, Ben can't get in. And if Ben does get in, what's he going to do? He's going to kick Hardman's ass, you know. So it's like any other piece of writing. Once you have your theme and your concept, then and you have the characters and you know what their personalities are, then you have to make them behave according to the character you've established.
It has to be true to the
So
character.
it's like putting together the pieces of the puzzle in a certain way. And so that's how I did it. And
John, is there anybody today in today's environment that you really think could be onto creating something like you have, or somebody that you admire, somebody whose work you really like to watch?
Well, I was friends with Toby Hooper until he died. His first film, he actually was, he was working on it at WRS Motion Picture Lab when we were working on our second film, There's Always Vanilla, which then had a title change to The Affair. But Toby never introduced himself. He sat there and watched some of our film, and I guess he was too shy at that point. And Toby was, after his film, which was too esoteric to go anywhere, it just died. And he was in Dallas, where he's from, for a Christmas vacation, came home late, doing last minute Christmas shopping. And some friends of his said, you need to go see this film called Night of the Living Dead. And he didn't want to go, and they dragged him to the theater, and he was so impressed. He was thought, well, this is what I need to do. I need to start my career somehow by doing a horror film. So he's in this mall, totally crowded, looking for Christmas presents, and the crowd was so thick he had trouble moving, and he went past the display of chainsaws, and he thought to himself, if I had one of those chainsaws, I could cut my way through this crowd. And that was the start of Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Oh my heavens!
Yeah, he told me this story when we finally, in the mid '80s, we had the same agent in Hollywood, a very powerful agency, Triad. And so Toby wanted to work with me on something and invited me out to his place and showed me some of his student films, and we became great friends. And the project we were going to do didn't happen. I later brought him in to direct Return of the Living Dead, the straight horror version I had written, and that didn't get financed. And the project didn't get financed until the producer Tom Fox brought in Dan O'Bannon, who then Dan had done Blue Thunder and he had done Alien, and so he got hired to rewrite and direct the Return of the Living Dead. And I love what he did. Turned it into a comedy. It's a really good movie, and
I haven't seen it. Can you stream these things right now?
I'm sorry?
Can we stream these things? Are they available on any of the streaming services?
I still couldn't hear it. I'm sorry.
Are they available by streaming? Could we watch these?
Probably. I have never watched it until after I didn't work on the production because I had to novelize Dan's version of the script.
Right.
And it had to be done. It had to be ready to come out on the same day as the movie. So I was back in Pittsburgh writing the novel while Dan and his crew and all the actors were in Hollywood making the movie. So and they're just great. They did a wonderful job. There's one of the best movie documentaries I've ever seen is called More Brains. The whole story of Return of the Living Dead. It's a great documentary.
Sounds wonderful. I have two scripts in my head. I'm going to tell you the titles. Do you know who Tony Verna is?
Do I know what?
Do you know who Tony Verna was?
Tony?
So Tony invented instant replay, right? And Tony and I had two scripts. He passed away, and I have these two scripts. Here's the first one. Algebra 1, Murder 2. Okay? And the second one is My Bloody Easter Bunny.
My bloody what?
My Bloody Easter Bunny.
My bloody
based
Easter
on
Bunny. Sounds great.
Let's go.
Well, I've made a bunch of movies, and lately my producing partner, who also published some of my books, Gary Vincent, he's distributed a couple hundred movies. He has all the same outlets that Lionsgate has, and nowadays when everything goes to streaming, there's so much opportunity now that didn't exist because you can be in business for $5,000. All you need is a computer and a camera, and that's the other thing. That's the thing we're proud of, that we influenced and led the way for people like Tobe Hooper, Sam Raimi, John Landis, you name it. We showed people how you could take a small amount of money and with a dedicated group of people make a movie that could jumpstart a career. Now, when I say small amount of money, when we did it, it was $150,000. Now people made movies for a few $100 that have gone out to make a few $1,000 or more. You know.
So one of the things that I've noticed is people continually say movie theaters are part of the past. And yet
I actually have said that I think movie theaters are going to go bye-bye. There may be a few select theaters operating, like we just did a thing into Mahoney Drive-In in eastern part of Pennsylvania, not far from Philadelphia, and it's one of the few drive-ins still operating. And they screened Night of the Living Dead and one of our newest movies, My Uncle John is a Zombie, which has great reviews. I play the lead role in it. I wrote it and co-directed it, and Gary is one of the producers. So, but it's a really good movie that we did for about $100,000,
Yeah.
and it's doing well.
So the rest of that statement that I was going to make is, yes, people say that movie theaters are going to be part of the past until something wonderful comes out. And then people flock to the movie theaters. And my example is going to be opening to a $150 million weekend, which was the Tom Cruise new movie, Top Gun.
Top Gun, yeah.
Right? And he opened to a $150 million weekend. And he didn't stream it. They didn't sell it to any services.
Mm-hmm.
But he produced a quality product. And when you have a quality product like that, I still believe people want the theater experience. I really believe in that. I do. But we do, we are a generation of immediate gratification, and we want to see, we want to sit down, we want to make it easy, turn the television on and watch whatever we want. But I still think there's a great demand for the movie theater experience. And honestly, you guys, the way you distributed your movie, I don't know that you could have done it that way today. I think you guys have really, you've really created a footprint no matter what it is. And I'm looking at your website. I love the things that you do. You teach how to make a movie. You're really almost like an enthusiast's website for somebody that's interested in the film business.
Yeah, my books are known as Bibles of independent filmmaking. I met one at the Land of the Dead premiere. I met Quentin Tarantino for the first time, and he said, George actually introduced us, and Quentin said, "You're the guy who wrote the books." And I said, "Which books?" Because I didn't know if he meant the novels or what. Yeah. He said, "Movie making books." And then later at the bar, we were having a drink, and this was a great blurb that I use a lot. He said, I made a movie I didn't finish, and then I read your books, and I took notes and made charts, and that's what guided me through my first complete movie.
I saw that on your website. I was intrigued by it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking a look there. Of course, you did your homework. But there was, but the thing about the movie theater, the trouble in the 40s, 50s, 60s, that Hollywood made 500 movies a year. Now they make very few. They can't. The theater owners can't stay in business with just a few blockbusters a year or so. That's why I think the theaters are going to disappear.
Oh yeah.
Not only that, but there's so much great work being done by the TV channels. Just wonderful stuff. One of my favorite things of all time is the HBO series Rome. And it's like being in Rome, and it's astounding because they use I don't even usually see movies twice. I'm just that way, and I don't have 5,000 movies on my shelf like a lot of filmmakers do. But in the case of Rome, I watched. It's 35 hours plus the extras, and I've watched it 5 times and bought both seasons. And even there are a number of different directors on it, because there had to be to get the damn thing done.
Yeah.
And yet there's a unity of style that persists through every episode. It's a unity of style in the writing and the directing. It's absolutely wonderful. And there it is. It's done on HBO. Not they were going to do a theatrical, but the sets burned down. So I wish they had, because I'd watch as many of them as they could make.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Cars, Stars, and Everything in Between. He's Richard Bazzi, the star. I'm Bubba from 100.7 Star. John Russo, thank you for joining us for Cars, Stars, and Everything in Between.
My pleasure.